Now, if you've been following the channel for any period of time or you've been out with us on a workshop, you'll know that Sarah and I are big fans of the 28mm focal length. Now, Sarah in particular has been using the 28mm since about 2015, and I would say at the moment that 90% of her archive is based on the 28mm focal length. Certainly all of her street work is 28mm. It was one of those lenses that she took to immediately, almost from the first moment she put it onto her camera. I watch Sarah now with the 28 and she doesn't even think about what the lens is seeing. She doesn't even think about what the lens is going to capture. It's just so automatic. It's almost like an extension to her eye. Now, I was much later to the party, probably by about 30 years. It was always an aspirational focal length, something that I wanted to use rather than something that I needed to use. When I think of 28mm, I immediately think of Ian Berry's classic photograph in Whitby, or the street work of Bruce Gilden and Garry Winogrand and Don Mccullin and William Klein and my very good friend Markus Andersen, and also the documentary and portrait work of Antonin Kratochvil. But ultimately, whenever I think of 28mm, I think of this book, Depardon's GLASGOW. So this for me is the gold standard. This is what I aspire to as a 28mm street photographer. It's a phenomenal book. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. It's 20 quid or less than 20 quid on Amazon now. Just go and buy it. Now, the problem for me was every time I tried 28mm, I never managed to spend enough time with it in order to master it. And it's not an easy lens just to pick up and start shooting with. It's okay for Sarah. She mastered it within a couple of weeks. You know, I'm playing catch up, as I always do these days. I even had a little Lumix for a while, a little GX9 I think it was called, with a 14mm pancake lens on it, which obviously is 28mm equivalent. And even then, even though I spent quite a considerable amount of time with that camera and with that lens, I never really fully got to grips with the actual focal length. Then a couple of years ago, that artistic curiosity started to bite me again. I bought a small lightweight 28mm and we've been spending time getting to know each other over the past couple of years, and I've been using this lens an awful lot. The great thing for me about the 28mm is that you can make it look like a really wide angle lens, or you can make it look like a longer focal length lens like a 35, just by using it in a different way. Especially with the really good modern lenses that we have now, where the manufacturers have virtually eliminated any sort of distortion. So ultimately, for me, the 28mm lens is a lens I can walk down a street with and shoot something close up, and then take a few steps further along and shoot something wide, and then a few steps further along and shoot something with a lot of negative space, a few steps more and shoot something with a lot of layers. It has that level of versatility, and there aren't really that many lenses which give you that level of versatility. And the other thing is, I've always found the 28mm to be quite immersive. It always feels like you're in the moment on the street rather than just watching it from a distance. The beauty about the 28mm is it's such a simple optical design. The lens can be made very small and very lightweight. Therefore, it becomes less intrusive when you're actually shooting with it. Also, with it being a wide angle, you get a lot of depth of field, and this makes it perfect for zone focusing. And again, that's something that both myself and Sarah use all the time when we're shooting out on the street. Now, obviously a 28mm isn't going to give you that really shallow depth of field. I had the pleasure of using an f1.4 28mm, and you have to be really on top of this subject in order to get any sort of shallow depth of field. So if you like that really blurry background and isolating your subjects with the lens, 28mm isn't going to work for you. There's just too much depth of field there to give you that look. Now, last year we had a lot of street workshops in the UK, and I'll link to this year's program in the description below. But we had a lot of photographers who came out with us who were using the 28mm lens, mainly through the Leica Q cameras and the Ricoh GR3. But the single biggest issue we had to help them with was getting closer to the subject. Otherwise, the 28mm just had too much information in the frame for them. Now, some of this was down to confidence, but a lot of it was down to the fact that the photographers were just seeing parts of a scene. They might see somebody in a funny hat, okay, so they would concentrate on that person in a funny hat and watch that person and kind of ignore everything else around the outside, and when they put the camera up to their eye, they were still concentrating on that person with the funny hat and kind of ignoring everything else that was around them. So when they pressed the shutter, that subject they were looking at so intensely was lost in amongst all the other information that the 28mm had taken in. And if they were shooting colour, it was even worse because you had all this other colour information going on around it as well. So what we concentrated on was getting them in closer, so at least they were able to cut out a lot of that surplus information within the frame. And that is the single biggest thing with the 28mm. You have to get close. Now you can argue you can crop all this extra information out. My argument is if you're cropping regularly that hard, then maybe 28mm isn't right for you. In our experience, we find a lot of people are happier on the street with something like a 35mm because you get some distance between you and the subject, and the photograph still looks natural and it still looks like it's a semi-wide angle, which everybody likes on the street, and it doesn't have the compression of something like a telephoto lens. So it was a real surprise for me to see Leica go down the 28mm route for their Q cameras. But it was no surprise to me to find Ricoh introducing a 40mm equivalent lens on their GR series. So let's take a look at some of the things that you can do to get the best out of the 28mm focal length. The main thing is to get closer. The closer you get, the better your photographs will be with a 28. Then you can use the fact that subjects look bigger the closer they are to the camera, and this is a great way of emphasizing people within a complex frame and making them stand out. And following on from this, look for layers. This lens is fantastic for adding layers to an image. Think about foreground, middle ground, background, and the relationship between them. And yeah, you can layer with other lenses, but there's something about the way the 28 renders layers which just works so beautifully, and maybe that's why it's so popular within cinematography. Don't be afraid to include the environment. Going back to the Depardon book, he did a lot of that in GLASGOW, using the environment to great effect with the 28mm. The 28 allows us to see more of the environment than a 35 or 50 given at the same distance, so use that to your advantage. Use zone focusing if your 28 will let you. If you're on a manual 28mm, use zone focusing. Set the distance to 12 feet, your aperture to f8 or 5.6. Keep your shutter speed high and just take photographs. You can shoot from the hip really easily like this, or if you bring your camera to the eye, it's so fast. You don't even have to look through the viewfinder to focus. You can literally bring the camera to your eye, take the photograph and move on. We use zone focusing. Well, I use it 100% of the time on the street, and Sarah uses it probably about 60-70% of the time on the street now. So there you have it. I hope you found this useful. Please let me know in the comments what you like about the 28mm or even what you don't like. It's always helpful for those that read the comments to get an opinion other than obviously mine and Sarah's. And if you've got this far, please think about giving us a like and maybe subscribing to the channel. I know it's a cliche, but subscribing really does help the channel. And I'll look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care.